Bryan, I noticed you prayed out on Jillian Michaels the other day. Do you want to pray us in?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, let's pray us in.
Sure.
Pray us in, we're ready.
Father, thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for every individual in this room who has traveled an independent pathway to sit here together. Lord, we share a mission, and that is to elevate the primacy of the human soul that you have blessed each one of us to have as a sentient being made in your image. Lord, use the abilities and talents and gifts that you have given each person in this room for their maximum benefit for our brothers and sisters in this life. In all things, use us as instrumentalities of your light, love, and glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Welcome to Common Sense CEO Bryan Hubbard. Thank you for that. And we have Angela Skudin here as well from the 343 Fund.
Yes, the Casey Skudin 343 Fund.
Casey Skudin 343 Fund. Well, I appreciate both of y'all joining us today. You mentioned in the prayer, which was great, that we've kind of all come together to talk about something that we all find very important for independently many different reasons, and that is the Ibogaine Initiative. Specifically now we're in Texas, the Texas Ibogaine Initiative. So I'm going to start with you, Bryan, because you've you've definitely been leading the charge on this, and starting all the way back in Kentucky, which is your home state, where it was basically passed by, and then you came here to Texas to continue the effort. So can you give us kind of a brief overview of what all you've been working on, what you've been dealing with, and what Ibogaine really is?
Back in 2017, I had the opportunity, after practicing law for 16 years in the state of Kentucky, to come into state service. And I was appointed to a position there that allowed me to lead the state's Social Security disability system. Within that job, I was asked to understand why Kentucky was second only to West Virginia when it came to the number of people in that state receiving Social Security disability. Kentucky, along with West Virginia, comprises ground zero of the American Opioid Epidemic, which began in earnest with the FDA's approval of OxyContin in December of 1996. And what we were able to see from a review of that system in that time in service there was that there had been an explosive rate of growth, not just an enrollment in the Social Security disability system itself, but an explosive increase in the issuance of habituating pharmacology in the form of opioids, as well as physiologically dependent psychotropic medications that were being administered to both adults and children within the Social Security disability system. Because of the record that was compiled in state government service, I was asked to lead the state's Opioid Commission, which was established by the legislature in 2021 to administer almost $1 billion in settlements negotiated with opioid manufacturers and distributors for their role in creating the epidemic that we now know in America has taken almost 1 million lives
so
since 1996.
So it took until 2021 for them to realize this. Yeah.
That's correct. The pathway to justice is often long and fraught with difficulty, but if you are persistent, you're going to get there. And when we speak of justice within the context of these settlements, we have to recognize that while there is some measure of accountability, in Kentucky's case, $842 million in settlement funds equaled about 8.5 months of gross sales of OxyContin by Purdue Pharma.
They were making like $100 million a month at one point.
Month.
Yes,
that's correct.
Yeah.
So when I was asked to do the job, the question was, what do we need to do with this money? And the answer was, while $842 million is a lot to the average person's ear, these dollars are crumbs off the tables of gluttons. And the very first thing that we've got to do is figure out how we improve on therapeutic outcomes for the treatment of opioid dependency. The very best treatment model we have, which is medication for opioid use disorder, that medication being Suboxone and Methadone, together they have about a 25% success rate. 3 out of 4 people are not able to successfully maintain their recovery with the use of what are basically opioid maintenance medications.
Made by probably the same pharmaceutical companies who made the opioids.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, when you create a problem, it's fun when you get to also be the ones to fix the problem.
You are exactly correct. The creators of this problem are also the manufacturers of its most available and commonly used treatment. So I told my boss then, Attorney General Daniel Cameron, we need to look for Kentucky's Manhattan Project opportunity to pioneer a therapeutic breakthrough for opioid-dependent individuals. This is one-time money. We've got to make it count, and we need to make it count generationally if possible. And I said, I don't know what that opportunity is, but I'm going to get to looking for it. In 2018, I read that a company called Compass Pathways had discovered that the psilocybin mushroom had a dramatic impact on alcohol-dependent individuals when it came to not just reducing, but eliminating their desire for alcohol.
For those who don't know, is the psilocybin mushroom the same as the mushrooms people are taking when they're tripping?
That is correct.
Okay.
Psychedelic mushrooms
There you
were
go.
discovered in 2018 to have a dramatic impact upon alcoholism.
Okay.
I happen to come from a family that has been generationally afflicted with its wicked relationship with alcohol. So when I read about this, I was jubilant that there was any progress at all around the issue of alcoholism. In 2021, I read an author by the name of Juliana Christina, which is her pen name, who wrote about her experiences with psilocybin mushrooms in treatment-resistant anxiety, treatment-resistant depression, and a near-fatal eating disorder she had acquired in adolescence. This individual also happened to be a very committed, hardcore atheist. But she wrote about her experiences with psilocybin and the way in which the mushrooms essentially helped her overcome her lifelong anxiety, her lifelong depression. It resolved her eating disorder, and most significantly from my perspective, it resolved her atheism.
So from the mushroom, she found God.
Yes, ma'am. So I reached out to her because of how beautifully she had written about all this in July of 2022, and I said, hey, this is who I am. This is the job I have been given. I've read your work for some time, and I would love to know whether or not you're aware of anything within the world of psychedelics that has specific application to opioid dependency. And she asked me, had I ever heard of Ibogaine? And this was on July 29th of 2022. And I said, I had not. She said, well, I'm going to give you some contacts. You get a hold of these people, and they're going to start educating you. Well, that touched off about an 8-month second full-time job of doing nothing but critical research and due diligence in terms of whether or not this was a legitimate Manhattan Project opportunity for Kentucky to pursue. And having talked to dozens of individuals who had received the treatment at a point at which their next stop was the grave, having spoken to the foremost academic and medical researchers on the topic, I came to the conclusion that Ibogaine represented the very best hope Kentucky could pursue to achieve a therapeutic breakthrough for opioid-dependent individuals who have struggled mightily but have not been able to overcome their dependency with the options that we currently have. It never was my intention to go and suggest that Ibogaine needed to become the new one-size-fits-all, everybody must do it therapeutic pathway to recovery. It was simply offered as an additional therapeutic choice that could improve upon outcomes that we're currently getting. We had a tremendously successful public announcement and education campaign in Kentucky. The commission that I led was prepared to vote $42 million, or 5% of the state settlement funds, to be matched by a drug developer that would see Ibogaine through the FDA's drug development process through the FDA pathway that's established for that. There was a change in Attorney General in November of 2023. The newly elected Attorney General came in with a different set of priorities, which did not include advancing this project. Not only did those priorities not align with the Ibogaine project, but I was asked to leave for having pursued it.
I would love to see his list of donors that helped get him
Well, there's one that's
in
out.
office.
That list is out there, and
I
it can be seen through a web link through Reveille Advisors/Ibogaine.
Something tells me you probably kept a lot, or were a risk for them, a lot of those donors. But carry on, sorry.
Well, Reveille Advisors did me the great favor of being able to establish a common nexus of financial relationships among the current Kentucky Attorney General, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, and the University of Kentucky, all three of which aligned against this project in unison, and all three of which are the substantial recipients of money generated by the opioid industry and the opioid maintenance industry itself. Kentucky's loss ultimately became the Texas opportunity that
Right.
we're here on the precipice of seeing come to fruition here on May the 13th, 2025, with about 3 days left in a legislative process that will tell us not if, but how much financial support Texas will give to develop Ibogaine as a breakthrough medication for opioid dependency, co-occurring substance dependency, as well as any other mental health or neurological conditions for which it demonstrates efficacy. And if we are successful, Texas will be the first state in the history of this country to take drug development by the horns and to drive curative therapeutic results for conditions that currently lack effective treatments.
Thank you, Texas.
Yeah, look at us. That's so exciting. Well, and I mentioned earlier, and for anyone who's watched before, my father has been running treatment centers in Texas since I was 3 years old. And this is truly his purpose in life. And he doesn't care why or how or what. He tells me regularly, God put me on this earth. I know it for a fact. My purpose is to save people from addiction in whatever way that goes. So I know he is very excited about this. His business partner is very excited about it as well. We'll talk offline, but if this does pass, they'll be, the first on board to kind of get going with whoever. We don't know how to all be implemented, but, I know they're excited about it. And I know there are other treatment centers that are also very excited about this idea, to move forward with everything. And thank you for what you're doing, because, it takes people like you, it takes people like my dad who truly care about helping people, not lining the pockets of whomever, whether it's, the politicians or the drug companies or whomever. So we really appreciate you, Kentucky, letting us borrow you for a little bit to help push this through. And then let's go ahead and introduce you, Angela. You have kind of a different story to tell, but again, tell your story, and then we'll kind of talk about why we're all here together.
Interestingly enough, my story is rooted in addiction too, and generational alcoholism. And I myself am a former alcoholic, addict, you name it. I say former because currently today, most prominently because of Ibogaine and Iboga. Ibogaine, the compound comes from the Iboga plant, from the Bwiti tribe in Gabon, Africa. So we owe a nod to number one, our earth, our creator and our earth, for the power of this plant. And we owe a major nod to the Bwiti tribe and their people, and Gabon for sharing their wisdom and their knowledge of this plant that seems to be of a different technology than us, with us as Westerners.
I think I heard you say in a previous interview, the word Iboga actually translates loosely, one of you, from God or something to that degree?
I'm not exactly sure what the genesis of the word Iboga is, but an individual who has been familiar with Bwiti tradition by the name of Dr. Joseph Barsulia told me that when the Bwitis were encountered by Catholic missionaries back in the 17th or 18th century, and they discovered that the Bwitis were utilizing Iboga within their religious and cultural ceremonies, they tried to explain to the Catholic missionaries what it was that they were doing. And the way in which they explained it was roughly analogous to, and I think the phrase was, eating God.
Eating God.
Just as the Catholics take communion and subscribe to transubstantiation, which is the body of Christ becoming real upon the ingestion of the communion rite. The Bwitis drew that analogy so that the Catholics would understand that this was their version of that.
Wow.
So here we have this beautiful translation from the Bwiti tribe, that knows this medicine more intimately than any other tribe or tradition or indigenous population in the world, translating it as eating God, as a rite of a communion for their people and what it does for the advancement of their souls. And we have it wrongfully scheduled as a Schedule 1 controlled substance in the United States.
Yeah, that's the same as LSD. I mean, they want us to believe this is a psychedelic that back in the 60s and 70s, people were taking too much, dying from all the crazy things, using it for recreational use,
losing their minds.
You know, I know people, I've been around people when they're on acid, literally that say, I want to rip your head off because your face looks like it's melting, like terrifying things. But that's not what this is.
No. And this is a non-addictive subs compound to start with,
right?
Which absolves it from this list. Right. We were speaking earlier before this podcast started, and our lawmakers and our elected officials owe us the due diligence of investigating this.
Sure.
And that's why our hope as a nation right now, and a nation deeply in need of recovery, is really, really hoping that the legislation and the lawmakers in Texas come through for the American people.
Well, and it's interesting that it feels like there was very little due diligence for the opioid crisis, right? Everybody was getting Oxycontin, and they turned a blind eye to what it really did, which was physically force. You were addicted at basically first ingestion, whether you wanted to be or not. You really thought you were just taking a painkiller.
You know, the interesting thing is there's just this power of a signature at the bottom of a prescription pad. Mm-hmm. And we are lacking that for Ibogaine as a compound. And it's not crazy to me. It's the power that we put in our medical industry. And to be honest, it should be there. But we need a proper protocol for people to get treated with this substance in the United States. It should be an option. It shouldn't be viewed as a drug.
Right.
It should be viewed as a treatment, a therapeutic treatment. There's nothing addictive about this. Nobody on the night after an Ibogaine journey says, let's do it again, you know?
Yeah.
I personally have done this journey twice.
Was your reasoning for addiction?
My reasoning was for Lyme disease. I had chronic Lyme disease.
Okay.
I was covered in sores from head to toe.
So chronic afflictions as well, not
chronic
just,
afflictions. I was told I had no road to recovery, to total absolution.
Were you bit by a tick?
Allegedly.
Yeah.
You know, I've been bit by many ticks. I grew up in Oklahoma.
Right.
It came on in 2018 for me. Mm-hmm. Through a series of body breakdowns, physical breakdowns. I was offered multiple surgeries to resolve.
What would you have
these
surgery
breakdowns.
on?
My back primarily.
Okay.
They equated it to age and.
And you're not even.
I'm 46 today.
Right.
And
so.
when this happened.
Not today.
Today in this room. But yeah, I'm 46 years old. Yeah. So they had just said, being active your whole life, you have chronic back pain. This is standard. But my body started breaking down 6 weeks after I had an MRI for one bulged herniated disc. I had two fully bulged herniated discs, spinal stenosis, left side scoliosis, degenerative disc disease, and a piriformis nerve impingement, which I have learned is a controversial diagnosis since, but I'm going to tell you right now, when a person's living in nerve pain, it's not controversial in their body what's happening.
It's miserable.
And I was living in constant nerve pain for about 9 months of my life to no resolution except for a daily opioid that I was offered. Mm-hmm. I was finally offered a medical marijuana, which did absolve many of my symptoms, or at least provided temporary relief.
Right.
But I was just offered, a daily opioid to be put on an opioid pain patch, which I had one doctor, his name was Patrick Anello on Long Island in New York, and he was a pain management doctor, and he said, I refuse to put this on you because the moment I put this on your body, you will be a drug addict, and I am absolutely not doing that to you. And he said, we are going to find out what's wrong with you, and if you find out before me, call me and tell me what you found out. And I was a bulldog with that man's
but
spirit.
Also
I found out.
Great for him because there's so few that will do that.
He sent me over to go get a medical marijuana card, and he said, girl, just buy some time and try to get your pain relief, and then when you figure out what's wrong, you'll be able to make a decision. I ended up not having either surgery. I was offered a back surgery and a hip surgery. I rehabbed my entire body after watching the Heal documentary and listening to Joe Dispenza speak about his process of meditation through this horrific injury that he had. And he said that he went home and he meditated on his back and putting his spine back together. Wow. And he didn't have surgery and he repaired his spine. And I said, that man is a human just like me.
Right.
If he could do that, I can do that too. And that was the day I started a meditation practice. And I think the acknowledgement that I could heal after being told by doctors that I could not, planted a seed in my
our
psyche
words
that
and
allowed
thoughts
me to heal.
have power. Yeah, absolutely.
So the medicine then further provided the invitation for that for my body. I sat with Iboga in my living room, and I think it was March of 2021. I was at my wit's end. I had tried everything Western medicine had to offer. My husband at the time was a New York City firefighter. We had this excellent medical plan, or so I thought. We ran out of prescription benefits of March that year. I was paying over $10,000 per month out of pocket for prescription drugs and treatment. Nothing was covered by my health insurance. I was gaslit by doctors. I was misdiagnosed with fibromyalgia. I was offered sleep medications, antipsychotics, and I had Lyme disease and a series of co-infections that were overriding my central nervous system. And it took an entire diet, lifestyle change, and just a real commitment to healing for me to get out of it. But one of the most profound substances on that journey was Iboga. Now, completely irresponsible for me to sit in my living room do this with some guy from California and no doctor present. But I was dying. Not only was I physically dying, I couldn't sustain my family. I was just a drain financially. So I had high level suicidal ideations at the time. And honestly, didn't want to wake up the next day from the nerve pain and just wished death upon myself, and realized there's just a large population of people in the world, and especially in the United States, that are living in this daily pain, and they can't go to a doctor's office for answers. And they can't even afford to walk into that doctor's office. And
they aren't going to get answers. They're going to get more pain by being fed
the
medications that perpetuate the problem.
Medications that perpetuate the problem, and a storyline about
like you said,
an inability
gaslighting,
to heal, and also a storyline about a diagnosis that's completely incorrect. So you're literally barking up the wrong tree, and you can't get your system to heal. You can only code it.
We've been trained to trust medical doctors, medical professionals, to believe whatever it is they tell you.
And we should, to an extent. Like, these people have been educated. The problem that's occurred is that we need re-educations in some of these things.
So on a previous episode, I had my nurse practitioner in, and one thing she spoke about is, we're now at a point where a lot of the medical schools are not being taught it's being pushed by the pharmaceutical industry. That's who's teaching the doctors. Or, to your point, they go to school, they get the basics, but then once you're in practice, I know even in what I do, what I actually learned in a book isn't necessarily what I practice every day, right? So you start practicing what you practice, and then the people who are continuing to give you your continuing education and coming in and speaking to you are those pharmaceutical reps. Oh, this is what this drug is for. This is what this drug is for. And that all of a sudden becomes your baseline education, not what you actually learned in medical school.
Exactly what you're saying. And it's actually terrifying to think that the education being received by the medical professionals
is
in
from
the United
22-year-old sales reps.
is from a big pharma sales rep. And you are 100% right, because my sister was one of the top level sales reps for a big pharmaceutical company in the United States, right here in the state of Texas. And she told me it was terrifying that she would go into the doctor's office and they were getting their education off the words in their mouth.
That's right.
So we're being sold things by the salesman.
Right.
And it cannot be that way. So I fell into this category where I was unable to be healed by Western medicine. My options were do this crazy drug where you're eating root bark in your living room with some dude from California.
And
Let's go.
Hope you make it through.
Option A.
Right.
Or option B, go to Germany, do this crazy treatment that was going to cost $80,000 that I did not have.
Right.
That my parents and my husband were both going to take their pre-retirement out. So then the guilt of that.
Right. Sure.
And then this might not work. And also this could kill you.
Right.
So I thought,
same treatment though. Germany
a different
would
treatment.
Okay.
They were going to give me put me in a medically induced coma and give me a fever of like 107.5, and that was then going to burn out the disease.
Okay.
But it wasn't going to be able to get to the diseases that I knew that I had.
Right.
So I was going to come out of there with maybe some gone,
But not all.
maybe dead.
Right.
So this is where I'm at. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
like a standard decision that like, hey, I find this guy online and hey.
It's not Tylenol or Advil. Which one works better?
No,
Yeah.
I had heard of this root bark that you eat this root bark and it can absolve
Everything.
physical pain. It can absolve disease, and I was at my wit's end. So I ate a bunch of root bark that night. I had absolutely no psychedelic experience. Okay, which it's important to note: 20% of the population has no psychedelic experience when they have this experience. So what happens is people are going into a psychedelic expecting the psychedelic experience, and they don't have it, and then they're telling the story it didn't work.
Right.
So you planted that seed, and then you're refusing to water it, you know,
Right.
based on a visual perception that I did not have. So what did I do? I went and told myself it didn't work. I laid in my bed that next day, and I thought, you've lost your mind. You've taken it too far. And I talked to myself on what is called the gray day of Iboga.
Yeah.
My ego came back in, and it was firing away on me about how dumb I am and what are you doing. And then the suicidal ideations that day were super high.
back again,
And I was just in this personal hell. Little did I know, I'm still on my Iboga journey here.
Right. Like that's
you know?
part of it.
I'm still in it, and it's still part of the process, and all of that talk was part of the process. And I tell myself all the story about how it didn't work. And here comes the night, which is normally a miserable time for me. I'm in high level nerve pain. I can't sleep without drugging myself. And it's very long for somebody that is at the point in their life that I was at. And I fell asleep that night, and I slept every hour, every minute of that night for the first time in my life since I was a kid. And this mind turned off. And I had the ability to turn it on and off. And I've had that ability since that night.
Wow.
I have gotten sleep every single night of my life since that night, which has allowed my brain to heal, including the night I watched my husband die in front of me.
Right.
I was sharing a hospital bed with my child while my other child, or a couch, while my other child was laying in the hospital bed, and I would wake up to my new reality,
Right.
which was this horrible existence in that moment.
Right.
And I was able to say to my mind, because of Iboga, there's nothing you can do for your body right now except sleep. And my mind obeyed. So I've been free of prescription drugs since my first dose of Iboga. I have remained there. I have slept every night. I have been absolved from my addiction to alcohol.
Come on.
I have been absolved from my addiction to Adderall. I have not been remedied of my ADHD.
No, it doesn't.
Me either.
Yeah.
If anyone finds out how to do that,
We'll find
shoot me a DM.
another tribe who has that plant somewhere. Yeah.
But I'm a better mother. I'm a better friend. I'm a better business owner. I'm a better human, period, because of this medicine. What I have done now, I mentioned my husband and his death through this. I lost my husband on June 17th, 2022 at 3:43 p.m. It was 2 days before Father's Day and what would have been his birthday as well. And he was a New York City firefighter. I never imagined he would perish next to me from a tree fall accident that our entire family was involved in. But at the scene of that, I was made very visibly aware of the trauma and tragedy that first responders were taking onto their plate as a result of my family's own tragedy. And I've recently come to find out way more facts about that. That was my traumatic experience in life. You know, I might have more, but I'm going to be able to probably count on one hand how many of those that I'm involved in or that I'm at. A first responder like my husband in his career is going to have 4,000 of those. And he's going to compartmentalize all of them somewhere in their body. And it's going to be at the detriment of his family, his mental health and wellness, and his physical health and wellness.
Let me ask you real quick. I know there's no way of knowing now, but do you think that your husband did have some PTSD from his time as a New York City firefighter?
I know he did because he struggled with mental illness. He struggled with depression and anxiety, much like all first responders. Nobody but me and the doctor that wrote him prescriptions for anxiety medication would ever know that about my husband.
Right.
And it wasn't something he came into our relationship with. It was something that compounded on him as he was on the job.
Sure.
A job that for him had a kitchen table as a firefighter where they could absolve, what was going on. They could talk as a family. But firefighters are the only ones in the first responder community that have that kitchen table. The police officers do not.
Right.
The EMTs do not. And to be honest with you, the departments do not set anything up as a way to do anything but compartmentalize that trauma.
Right.
So I have started the Casey Skudin 343 Fund shortly after the death of my husband. I took his life insurance policy in its entirety and paid it forward to start a fund to allow first responders access to psychedelic treatment or plant medicine treatments for the purpose of treating treatment-resistant depression, suicidal ideations, addictions, and conditions like Lyme disease and unresolved pain and phantom pain in their body. To date, we have sent over 130 first responders through our program. And
Sent them where?
Through a grant program to provide access to safe and supportive psychedelic treatments.
So some of it is Ibogaine, some of it is other treatments.
Ibogaine, 5-MeO and 5-MeO DMT are the most checked boxes on our grant requests currently. And it's in a major part because first responders are either part of the military community or they really look up to the military community.
Sure.
And we've had our veteran community be our guinea pigs for this treatment for their trauma resolution, and we have seen great results from it. We've had scientific studies that have proven that not only is this a non-addictive compound, but it is a compound that provides great therapeutic relief and even advancements and neuroconnections in the brain. For me personally, it has absolved my addiction issues that I wasn't even asking for it to absolve. I didn't even know that would happen. The other thing that it has done for me is it has absolved the physical pain in my body, and I remain in the best health of my life today, and I've had the least amount of doctor's visits in my life.
Sure.
That statement right there makes this compound a compound that that might help too much.
Right.
And I can only see that would be the
feet
reason.
Are being drug a little bit on it.
It would have a causative effect, presumably, that would leave people not being substance dependent or having physical ailments that fund a large portion of money in this country and in the world.
Well, and let me ask you, Bryan, because you are kind of the resident expert. Can you speak to what actually happens when somebody takes the Ibogaine journey? What in their brain is actually happening?
Well, thank you for that question. And let me start by acknowledging, Angela, here, the story that you have told is exactly why I have been willing to bet everything that I am as a human being, for whatever it's worth, on trying to make this a reality within the United States of America. Everything that you have experienced by way of the profound suffering that you've just described has prepared you to be the messenger for this that I now see sitting across from me. And it is a blessing to know you. And thank you for being bold and brave and ready to take home the fight on the front lines for this in the United States. Thank you, ma'am. It's an honor to be with you. In terms of how it works, no one knows. And that's a fact.
Right.
There is a gentleman by the name of Dalibor Samish is his name. He is a genius chemist at Columbia University who has devoted his life to studying the ibogaine molecule. And this guy has looked at Lord knows how many different chemicalogical compounds and molecules over the course of his career. And in a conversation with him last year, he said, there is no question but that this has all the hallmarks of higher intelligence design that the human mind cannot even begin to comprehend.
So that's an intellect's way of saying God.
Correct. This is a divinely engineered medication that has a degree of sophistication that our most advanced technology through the application of AI is just now beginning to get its hands around. This same gentleman, Dr. Shamish, said, we can apply AI to Ibogaine and it will work for decades to try to understand it, and it's not going to get to the bottom of it. What we know is what it does.
Right.
And it works on the mind, body, and soul of the human being in ways that are profound. While the Bowedes used it for centuries, a gentleman by the name of Howard Lotsoff, who had struggled for 9 years with heroin addiction, came into contact with Ibogaine in the mid-'60s. He was part of the emerging counterculture at the time. He was kind of a substance use omnivore. If it was there to be taken, he was going to ingest it. So he wanted to understand what this was. So he took it. And he had a 10 to 12 hour experience that was very challenging. Your audience should know, as Angela has described, this is not in any way a recreational or party drug. If your idea of a good time is being in a state of semi-paralysis for 10 to 12 hours and throwing up repeatedly, you're going to have a blast.
Awesome.
But if that ain't your idea of a party, then you ain't going to be having one.
Yeah.
For the substance-dependent individual.
There's some strange people out there. You never know. But
Yes,
go ahead.
ma'am. Based on stories such as you have just heard today, what we can say is Ibogaine does three things. For an individual who is substance-dependent, they experience a restoration of their brain's neurochemistry that brings them to the point that they were at before they ever used the first opioid, before they ever took the first drink, before they ever snorted the first cocaine, before they ever took the first meth. They have a complete neurochemical reset of that brain that positions them to pursue long-term durable recovery with neurological restoration. You can't take a healthy person or an unhealthy person. You can't take an unhealthy person who has a neurological impairment and expect them to solve the unbelievably complex difficulties that arise from rebuilding a life in addiction with all of the legal, financial, and logistical challenges that presents.
And not to mention, one of the things my father and I spoke about here is they do brain scans. He works really close with Dr. Amen, and they do brain scans that literally show what the addiction has done to your brain. And so now what you're speaking to is this, one-time Ibogaine journey I would love to see someone go in. I would hate that there's anyone, but go in with the opioid addiction, drug addiction, whatever, scan their brain. And I'm sure y'all have done this. Take the Ibogaine and then scan it 3 weeks later, and you're telling me we will see a difference.
Those brain scans have been done with veterans who have had traumatic brain injury. There is no comparable set of studies that reveal what the effect has been on a substance-dependent individual.
There needs to be.
Absolutely there needs to be, which is why we are pushing so hard in Texas to make sure that this is our next frontier for recovery. What we do know is that 80% of folks who get a single treatment have physiological substance dependency resolved within 36 to 48 hours.
Wow.
That's a process that usually takes 18 months of complete abstinence to begin to take hold. That number goes up to 97% with the administration of a second supportive dose for any individual who may continue to experience withdrawal symptoms.
How much time needs to go between your two doses?
It's usually done within the 3 to 7 days.
Okay, so you take a trip, and as of right now, you have to take a trip because, again, we don't have it here yet.
Correct.
But it can be done within the same trip to a clinic.
That is correct.
Okay.
Usually you're there in an inpatient setting from anywhere from 5 to 10 days.
Okay.
And if within the 2-day period that follows Ibogaine treatment, if an individual is still experiencing craving or withdrawal, they can receive that second supportive dose, and the resolution of the physical withdrawal symptoms goes up to about 97%.
Now, I do have another question. I know y'all have medical staff on site because it can cause some medical concerns when you're on it. But y'all also speak to, kind of a God moment you've spoken to, and I'll ask you to kind of describe that a little more, but is there any sort of therapy or therapeutic, or do y'all have like psychological doctors there on site to help kind of work through that? I'm not y'all, I know it's not you, but at the clinics, to help work through, because for some of these people, if you talked about the person who is the atheist and all of a sudden for the first time they're experiencing God, I would imagine that might be a little bit overwhelming. On top of I'm paralyzed and I'm puking nonstop. So is there that they're available to them as well?
Both clinics with which I am familiar, and those clinics are the Ambio Clinic south of Tijuana and a clinic called Beyond, and that's spelled Beond in Cancun, have counselors that engage individuals before the treatment in order to prepare them for what it is they may experience. And then they have individuals who would be the equivalent of peer counselors as well as trained counselors who provide long-term individual support once the person's gone through treatment.
Great.
All of this is done remotely, of course, because the clinic's based in Mexico are not able to interface once a person comes back stateside.
I have a friend who actually introduced all of us who did it, and she said with the it was a group of vets like Navy SEALs, and now they have like a group chat, and they'll never not all be like each other's person for the rest of all time.
So I think it's important to note, those group chats are super important. I know Ambio implements group chats where everybody kind of goes through in a container of support. However, it's so funny. People expect these service providers that are providing medical treatments to provide the world.
Sure.
So they go down there. These people are only down in Tijuana, Mexico, or Cancun, Mexico for 5 days.
Right.
So the treatment facilities are there. We don't have a lot of ibogaine treatment facilities in the world, period.
Right.
So they're having this container of people, but they're also asked to be the medical experts on it and the treatment experts that we need them to be. So it's really, really important that individuals take responsibility for their own integration pre and post journey. They need to seek out proper support and treatment for how they're going to integrate this into their lives. Because as you mentioned, and as Bryan explained, I've witnessed this myself. I've seen an atheist find God through ibogaine or through 5-MeO-DMT.
And then it's like, well, I've never gone to church. What do I do? So
and I've seen them struggle after that because their entire existence demanded that there be no God.
Right.
And now they are at a whole nother spot. And you're talking about for anyway, my population of people, first responders that love to know what to do next.
Right, control, the control side. And you don't have control anymore,
So it is a rebirth of a person's existence to that perspective. I've never seen it do the opposite. I've never seen this take away someone's belief in God. I have only seen it develop deeper or create a belief in God. So we're not talking about anything that's going to take that away. We're not talking about drugs.
Right.
No, we're not talking about coming and doing drugs. We're talking about a therapeutic compound from the earth of our Creator.
Sure.
That is transforming people's lives, resetting all of their addiction receptors. We're talking about something that can not only address addiction, mental illness, but this medicine, from all perspectives and all accounts that I've witnessed, makes people better humans.
And so so let's look at me. I've drank alcohol, I've tried drugs. I wouldn't say I'm addicted to anything. I'm very blessed. I don't have depression, anxiety. It's never really been something I've had to deal with. I'm very aware of that. But what if I don't have any chronic illnesses or injuries at this point? I'm very aware that I'm a very blessed person, but is there not something I could still gain from going and doing it?
Oh, there's no question.
Yeah.
And
I think I'm good, but also you don't really even remember what great was maybe until maybe you do it.
I think a lot of folks are stuck so much in survivalism, perhaps we lose sight individually and as a society that our goal in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive.
We just had that episode a couple episodes ago with that's literally the name of one of my episodes. Yeah, Thrive, Not Survive.
One of our podcasts is called that.
How about that? Well, I'm glad I hit the tic-tac-toe and didn't realize it.
We didn't even prep you with that one. Good job.
When I rolled this project out in Kentucky, I was very much convicted about the fact that if I were going to get out and advocate for this, I needed to be willing to take my own medicine, especially in light of the fear-mongering that was being deployed against it to dissuade the commission from taking a positive vote. So my wife and I together in November of 23 went down to Ambio to have the experience and to understand everything that it was. Now, I came to the table with some trauma history from childhood, but nothing by way of substance dependency or anything that I would consider a mortal threat to my life through treatment-resistant depression or suicidal ideation. I'd certainly had a very long and extensive problem with anxiety, and when I went down and set my intention, it was, take this cross of anxiety off of me that I've carried since childhood and everything that flows from it. My wife, and this really is spectacular, she and I have known each other for 24 years. We've been close and dear friends. We became married in December of 2016, together for now 11 years. We'll be married for 9. And when I first met her, she had just had her son, who will be 24 years old this year. After she had him, she experienced a profound postpartum depression, which translated into the development of a psychotic mood disorder. And she is an ultra alpha female, high caliber lawyer, and she struggled mightily at times with this mood disorder. And when she and I got together, there were times that it tested the durability of, first and foremost, our friendship and our marriage. So when the time came to make the decision to go to Ambio, she had heard a lot of the testimonials of veterans who had been given just an unbelievable amount of pharmacology to address both physical and psychological problems, all of which were ineffective. And she heard testimonials of folks who had been on SSRIs. In her case, her psychiatrist placed her on Celexa, which she had to take every single day. If she missed a Celexa, I knew it because I could see it in her eyes, I could see it in her affect, and we had some significant difficulty in our first couple of years of marriage related to that. And when it came time to get ready to go, she said, I've heard all these veterans talk about how they went down for a treatment and they had all these prescriptions, and on the other side, they didn't need them anymore. I wonder if I might be able to come off Celexa if I go. I said, well, let's go give it a try. So as part of our pre-preparation, they advised us that she would have to be Celexa-free for 5 days before we made the trip to Mexico. And
That's
that was scheduled to occur on November 28th. Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. When they told me that, I said, well, there's no way we're coming. I said, I can't be in this house with her for a day without it. I'll never make it 5 days.
And on an airplane.
I'll never get her on an airplane. I said, this is not happening. They said, well, we're going to give you a supplementation regimen. And there again, I just was incredulous. I thought, B12 and vitamin D ain't going to get us through this. But they came up.
What are they going to give you to get you through the 5 days?
That's right. So they gave us a supplementation regimen. They said, she's going to get edgy, but you're going to get her down here. And sure enough, that's what happened. Now, my wife is very much a left brain rationalist. As between the two of us, I'm more of the right brain, expressive, emotive, impulsive sort of individual. And on the way down there, she said, you're going to be the one who has all these beautiful visions, and I'm not going to see anything. So we each went together, and we had our journey together. Mine was very stark and profound, not beautiful, but profound. It lasted longer than hers. I remember her coming and tapping me on the shoulder at about 8:30 in the morning after we had gone down 9:30 the night before. And I opened took the eye cover off, and she was it was almost as though she had undergone a transfiguration. The smile, the joy that she was emanating, and I knew immediately. I said, thank you, God.
Yeah.
You gave her a wonderful experience. And she proceeded, after I got up, to describe what she saw. And while I'm a creative person, there is nothing that I could have put pen to paper to generate by way of a scripted experience for her that would even come close to the beauty she experienced in her Ibogaine journey. And the most, aside from that, I am proud and just overjoyed to say that her last Celexa was taken on November 23rd of 2023.
5 days before you left.
Amen.
5 days before we
Yeah,
left.
amen.
And
That's
I would
great.
never have believed that possible until we got to experience it firsthand. So that's a very long way with stories to say it can absolutely enhance the human
for
experience.
you still feel like for you there was positive outcome that came from it.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. 2 weeks after our Ibogaine journey is when the current Kentucky Attorney General demanded that I resign my job for having pursued the Ibogaine project in Kentucky. And that affirmed for me that I got the medicine just in time, because the way in which that entire ordeal was navigated was completely and totally different than it otherwise would have been had I not had the blessing of receiving God's medicine
That's
just
right.
about 2 weeks before it happened.
That's right. Well,
This is for everyone.
Right.
This you asked, like this
Yeah.
medicine is for everyone. It is for your brain health.
right.
You know, there's not something positive that someone wouldn't get for this.
Well, and again, you know, like I say, I don't have any issues. I don't have any, but we all have done some sort of trauma to our brain over the last. I'm 40 years old. Surely, you know, there's something to be healed there. My real reason for even reaching out to our friend that we have about it and really wanting to have this conversation with y'all is somewhat personal. The first episode I did of this podcast was one of my dear friends. Her son had a non-fatal drowning the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, 2020. Let's see, we're in 25 now, so 2022. And he's now 7 years old, but you know, he has a traumatic brain injury. They've done all the therapies that you can do. They are huge believers. Like, you know, they went to New Orleans and spent 6 weeks doing nothing but hyperbaric chamber therapy with a doctor there. They've done, you know, they actually now have a chamber at home. They've done all different things. They're looking into, there's some other places in Mexico because, again, they want to prove them here, where they even cut new pathways in your brain so that, you know, things can try to actually move through the injury and all of that. And when I hear this, anyone who knows his story, when I tell them about Ibogaine, every single person says, "What about Tripp? What about Tripp? His name's Tripp." So I ask you, do y'all know of two things? Number one, has anyone who's fully basically invalid from their brain injury? So now I know there's you know, different veterans or first responders who have brain injuries, but they're still functioning. My friend who did it was still very much functioning, but she did have a brain injury that she feels was completely healed from Ibogaine. But have y'all ever had anyone in there who, you know, isn't going to be able to tell you how uncomfortable they are or anything else? He's nonverbal. He has a feeding tube. Have we done any studies there or testing there?
I am not aware of any study on an individual with a TBI who has been fully incapacitated.
Yeah.
The closest thing I could come to would be an analogy to a Parkinson's patient with
Sure.
whom Governor Perry and I had an opportunity to speak about 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
This gentleman lives in Germany. He was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's at age 41.
Mm-hmm.
By age 51, he was completely bedfast and living in a 24/7 skilled nursing home facility there in Germany. As a last-ditch effort to regain some functionality, he underwent a procedure called deep brain stimulation, and this is a highly invasive surgery where holes are drilled into the skull and electrodes planted onto the areas of the brain that are associated with dopamine production. So this gentleman underwent a deep brain stimulation procedure. 1 month later, he was able to get out of bed, but he had no volitional control over his motor movements. And he was so miserable and had suffered for so long that he decided to sign up for euthanasia services in Germany, which are available
Which is legal
there.
there, yeah.
I'm not sure how he heard about this researcher, but a gentleman by the name of Tobias Emery, who is with the University of Zurich in Switzerland, was connected with this gentleman. And over the course of a month, he gave him a daily Ibogaine pill, and each week the dosage was increased. I think it went from 20 to 40 to 60 to 80 milligrams. By the end of a 1 month course of daily, what we would call microdose, or the sub-mystical dosage of Ibogaine, this gentleman was able to stand up, to walk, to become self-sufficient, to move out of the nursing home, to move into an apartment next to his mother and ride his bike 3 miles a day.
Wow. Yeah.
The before and after videos of his exposure to Ibogaine treatment following the deep brain stimulation procedure, they are profound.
So in an instance like that with the microdosing, is it less uncomfortable than doing the experience you guys did?
Certainly.
It just takes longer.
Certainly.
But
yes.
But that might be an option for someone like this who, he might not be able to withstand, and he certainly wouldn't be able to let us know because he's, again, nonverbal, how uncomfortable he is, what he's going through, whatever else. But perhaps a microdose option, if we can get it there with legislation and everything else, would be an option for him. And this gives, there's an entire community now that we've learned of these, non-fatal drowning parents who they'll do anything. They will spend any amount of money. We will raise the money. Our community in one day did a benefit. We raised over $300,000 for them because we knew nothing was going to be able to heal him, FDA approved, basically. We were going to have to look for alternative medication, alternative treatments, things like that, which all of that comes out of pocket. And so it's not a matter of can we get him there, just what will actually work. And these parents are there. They're at their wits, they will do anything.
I would have the parents contact a facility like Ambio. I do know, or Beyond.
Right.
And ask them. I do know that we personally, through the 343 Fund, have sent a severe TBI person through. He isn't verbal, but he's incredibly hard to understand and paralyzed, all but his left arm.
Yeah, and Tripp's not paralyzed,
twice.
but he can't walk. He can't. But he moves.
He's gone twice.
Okay.
Once on a grant and then once on his own. So he saw enough neuro regeneration to make the trip again. And he lives very far. He lives in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So it's a really uncomfortable long trip for him, but he saw enough. And I would be happy to give you his contact information so that he could speak with Tripp's parents. So
awesome. Yeah, that would be amazing.
And then tell his experience firsthand.
And then has there ever been anything with children?
Well, I'll go back to the Bowedes. The Bowedes initiate their children into the tribe with Iboga.
Okay.
And this is something that is done in childhood.
Wow.
And just as, well...
It's like their first communion, like you said, like they're them, eating God.
It's their religion.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if anyone is shocked at the notion of giving Iboga or Ibogaine to a child, let me say that if you have a child who goes in for ear tubes, at least at the University of Kentucky, the standard pharmacological procedure is to give that child fentanyl before they have tubes put into their ears.
Which is
if we
wild.
can give children some fentanyl, we can certainly, within the context of appropriate and responsible medical research, give them an opportunity to
My
receive
son
Ibogaine.
dislocated his elbow 2 years ago, so he's 13. And we're in the ER, and he's like, Mom, it still hurts. It still hurts. And I went to the nurse. I said, could y'all get him some pain meds? He's really in pain. She's like, well, we already gave him fentanyl. And I'm like, this is in the height of the fentanyl crisis. And around here in Texas, as you know, it's coming across the border. It was nonstop. And we had kids in our own high school right here dying from it. So it's terrifying to hear that, you've just given my kid, without me even realizing it. No, there was no, I didn't sign off on that, but I guess in the moment they do what they need to do or what they think they need to do. So you're not wrong. And Tripp actually, after his accident, they were giving him fentanyl, assuming he was in pain. And what they found out, his aunt actually figured it out. His tongue was severely swollen and he couldn't swallow, so that they ended up intubating him, and they couldn't figure out why. And she did the research to find one of the allergic reactions to fentanyl is a swollen tongue. And as soon as they removed the fentanyl from his medication, all the swelling went down.
It's incredible. I will say, on the notion of the tribes giving this to the children, it's really just our culture that is not educated on these tribes and their traditions. It's standard for the Shipibo people to put ayahuasca on the tongue of a newborn baby, and it is standard for a curandera, a shipibo curandera, to journey with ayahuasca throughout their entire pregnancy and bring that baby into the ceremony. So this is just, it's strange because we don't do it, but we give our kids fentanyl at the hospital.
Right.
You know?
Right, yeah.
So it's all just a perspective, and we're just not used to jungle medicine. But due to the great state of Texas, we might get to learn a lot more about it that's going to replace that fentanyl and really change lives for not only our children, but for future generations to come, for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren.
Right.
This is so important that people have a supportive container. I think when administering any of this, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, talking about how the facilities do provide these containers. They provide integration calls, but you have to remember, you're going to be on an integration call with all sorts of people, all sorts of demographics. So it's nice if you can make your own little supportive unit. And through my organization, the integration portion has become the front line. If psychedelics healed alone, Bryan and I would certainly be completely reformed, just healed humans. But that's not, taking a pill does not
completely
heal you.
heal everything.
No.
Right.
We are asking so much from this medicine, and a large portion of this relies on your willingness to authentically take an introspective lens into your past.
Sure.
And be willing to examine and release that and integrate what you've seen into real life. I'm going to say this. Psychedelics get a bad rap because people will say, I don't want to see that, or, it made them go insane. I have never experienced anyone being shown anything on psychedelics that they were not ready to see. This is not a malevolent medicine. This is a medicine that is for your soul's greater good. This is a medicine that is from our Creator. It is from God.
Right.
And we do not understand it as human beings. I do not know if our technologies currently on this planet today will ever understand Iboga or Ibogaine. And I don't know that it matters.
Right.
But if we can get this categorized properly and then administered safely medically, and it's very easy to administer it safely medically. It does have a cardiac indicator.
I was going to say, speak to what, because I think anybody who, if this is their first time even hearing the word Ibogaine, watching this episode, if they were to go look at it, they have to be thinking to themselves, well, what are we waiting for? Like, what's the holdup? Other than Big Pharma losing out money on all the things we will heal. But, what's the holdup? What's the hang up? So can y'all, speak to...
So me doing that in the living room, I could have killed myself due to the cardiac indicator, which is so important that we are provided safe settings. I'm going to let Bryan explain to you about that, because I love how I just heard him explain it earlier today on a radio show, and I love how he explained it. But there is a proper protocol that he'll explain to you now that is in place that can protect against those things and have medical support in place that can intervene if needed.
Okay.
Ibogaine has the propensity to prolong the QT interval. And for your audience, the QT interval is the time that goes by between the beats of the heart.
Okay.
Ibogaine is a stimulant, but ironically, and this gets to some of the mystery of it, it slows down the heart.
Right, because if you've ever taken Adderall, it does not slow down your heart, and or any other stimulant, right.
So if you don't have someone who understands how to administer the medication and they give someone too much, it will stop their heart and they will die. There are also certain conditions that a person may have that create a propensity for the prolongation of that QT interval. So before an individual gets Ibogaine treatment, they need to go to a physician. They need to be cleared through an EKG to make sure that they don't have an underlying condition that can create QT prolongation. And then when they go to the clinic, they've got to go with somebody who they understand to be an expert in its medical administration in a clinically controlled medical setting. You want to have somebody go and stay inpatient for 5 to 10 days. And when they receive Ibogaine, they will also receive the co-administration of liquid magnesium, because it is believed that the co-administration of magnesium, as applied through the clinics that are offshore from the United States for years, safely mitigates that cardiac risk. And this, again, I want to emphasize the need for safety and due diligence at all times. Just as Ibogaine is not a now and forevermore cure, but provides an individual with the very best reestablishment of a new life that they can pursue and build on
Start
their
fresh,
own,
right? Yeah.
so must they approach this with the utmost respect and caution, recognizing that this is a serious medication. It is not a party or recreational drug or experience whatsoever.
Okay. But other than that, yeah.
Other than that, nothing.
I'm sitting with 3 people in this room who've all done it.
Yeah.
And they're
And
all still here.
We're alive.
They're all still here.
You know, it's interesting. I'll have people going through the 343 fund, and we provide an integration support container pre and post journey that's pretty extensive, and give you a psychedelic integration coach for a year minimum, post journey, pre and post journey. But during the process of it, you'll have to, as Bryan mentioned, you have to come off of certain substances, and that's the most dangerous part. And if you open up, people will talk about that are coming through the program. Oh, I'm really scared about this medication. And I'll say, are you on an SSRI currently? They say yes. I'll say, have you ever opened up the information pack and read that?
And read that,
they say no.
Right.
And I'm like, well, do that.
Right.
And you'll get your skin.
And it'll be a lot less
about that. And then this will seem like a breeze.
Yeah, a breeze,
and,
right.
I've had someone call me back and be like, oh my gosh, I'm terrified to be on this.
Right.
I'm like, let's get excited.
That's
to
right.
wean off,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
mean,
But
there's a
often-
reason that part of the commercial with all the people smiling and happy goes real quick at the bottom. They don't want you to know all
There's a
that.
lot
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so we're talking about they're already on something, that could potentially cause them
Major.
to end their
Yeah,
life.
Sure.
So
We just breeze by that. Yeah.
we just breathe by that, and we rewrite prescriptions for kids for that. No problem.
No problem.
We see the majority of the people that are stuck, trapped on these substances, as Bryan was describing that his own wife was trapped on these things. We see that they become free of these substances post journey, and they don't need those tools. I'm going to call them tools, though.
Right.
It's important to know that SSRI save lives, you know. But there comes a point in time when somebody's ready to not be numb anymore, and they actually want to do that introspective journey that allows them to break free of the chains of needing a substance to regulate their central nervous system.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. That they may not even realize it's not an addiction like an opioid addiction or an alcohol addiction, but they are
chemically addicted.
That's right. They have to be on it. Yeah.
It is an addiction.
Right.
I myself have been on SSRIs, and then when I don't take them, I feel like have gotten these massive brain zaps.
Yeah.
Just even going through the withdrawal process. So having been a person that's had the ability to have had a path of addiction, of chronic disease, of misdiagnosed postpartum depression, and been giving all of these mood stabilizers, SSRIs,
Throwing
sleeping
it all
aids,
at you, yeah.
for years. I see everybody's perspective when they're coming through my program, and they're like, oh, this is going to be a journey for me to get off of this, or it's going to be
So
of
hard
any
to-
substance.
yeah.
And so I always like to acknowledge, if these tools weren't in existence, I'm even going to say alcohol and cocaine. If it wasn't for alcohol and cocaine, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair today.
Right.
So it's so important to acknowledge without shame what got you here, and then realize that there's other things available to you that can free you from needing these substances.
Right.
So,
Right. Well, and then to speak specifically to who you do help, because I know in the past a lot of what you've done, and we love our veterans. We know they need help. A lot of these studies have been on veterans so far, but let's not forget that, the first responders, and a lot of them, they're in their own communities. I think I told the story earlier, but we have a friend who is a firefighter right here in our town, And he got a call last week, and it was his own son having a seizure, and you have to show up to your own house. So talk about, you said your husband probably had 4,000 instances throughout his career. I'm sure that's a number y'all have determined through stats and everything else. But these people are dealing with it day in and day out, and then they have to show up to Bobby's birthday party like nothing happened.
Yeah, and the 4,000 number is just an average.
Right.
So, and they're driving past a McDonald's where they saw a kid get wrapped around a pole in there in a traffic accident. But, other people are just going through and ordering their Frosty and having a nice day. So it's just set and setting for these people. They don't come home from war.
Right.
They're
living
being a police officer in your town, like that's your war zone too.
Right.
So we have the privilege as American citizens of being sheltered from a lot of these things, but by the grace and sacrifice of our first responders.
Right.
And they deserve to go through the car wash and have all of that cleaned off just like every other American does.
Right.
I'd like to observe, if I might, the irony that we are here to discussing, whether we're talking about veterans who have gone with a willingness to lay their lives down to defend truth, justice, and the American way, what is ostensibly the freest society on earth, or whether we're talking about first responders who help preserve the day-to-day established order that allows us all to exist and potentially thrive as human beings. All of them are in service to a system which has prohibited and criminalized their access to a medication which can liberate them from the needs of others that create their own afflictions. The fact that veterans and first responders are the objects and targets of legal prosecution for the system that they serve because they've had to go around it to get the treatment that they need is a criminal reality that is an indictment of that system, and it best change in a hurry.
Yes. Well, and again, that's why we're so grateful for what you're doing. And I'm proud to be a Texan and that we have people like you and Governor Perry who are fighting for this because, like I said, I've lived around it. I've seen the addiction side of it with what my dad does. I have friends who are police officers, firefighters, all of the above. I have the close friend with the child who has the brain injury. So I feel like me personally, I touch so many people, or I have so many people around me that this could save their life without a doubt.
And what Bryan just said, the fact that we have laws in place
To keep it.
Preventing people from getting this kind of help. Every active duty person that comes through my organization is risking losing their job and their retirement for helping themselves. And we'll talk a lot about the moral injury, especially for the police officers. And I've had several of them say to me, if I get off this train keeps going and it doesn't notice that I get off. I don't need to protect a pension because I'm going to put a bullet in my head if this doesn't work.
Right.
So we're talking about people that are at their wits' end, and it's either they still exist on Earth or they die.
Right.
And we have a system in place that's preventing them from something that's going to not only help them recover, but gain their life back. There's also been instances where first responders it's been used in court in child custody battles that they even went and got this help to get themselves sober and relieved of suicidal ideations, and that has worked. And because it is an illegal substance here in the United States, the other parent has used it to try to paint them as a drug addict. So what Bryan just stated is it's criminal that is happening, and that this beautiful substance from the ground, from our creator, that can help save so many lives, as being miscategorized and labeled as not only a drug, but used as a substance to paint somebody as some sort of addict. It is absolutely should not be on that list. And as I said earlier, it is up to our elected officials and our representatives to right this wrong.
So that's what I was going to ask next is, obviously we've already voted and put people into place who are in place. Is there anything the people can do beyond voting for those people at this point, or is it in the hands of now the government we've put in place?
Government exists downstream from culture. And culture is created by millions of individuals who act by themselves, who act within the context of their families and communities to recognize and elevate realities that can help change conditions that we all live with every day. You, by virtue of hosting this podcast, to have this discussion with us that will be distributed to an audience who is going to hear Ibogaine for the first time, you are illuminating and elevating a reality with which they are unfamiliar.
Sure.
As culture change occurs, conversation by conversation, person to person, family to family, community by community, over time you build momentum for things like the Texas Ibogaine Initiative, which just passed the Texas House of Representatives by a vote of 141 to 2.
Wow.
This is
Who are
a
the
project.
History making.
Find me those two.
This
Jeez.
Texas is ready to complete a job that was begun with a public announcement at the Kentucky State Capitol on May 31st of 2023.
Wow.
When the light of truth is given the opportunity to pierce the darkness, Katie bar the door, because in the right place and in the right soil, in this case Texas soil,
Well, and
truth can take root and bring some liberation, and we're right on the cusp.
And we are the right place because I'll tell you what, again, I may be biased because I'm here, but this state has seen so much pain in the last 4 years with our border being wide open and the fentanyl crisis and opioids. I mean, that's coming over too. And it's just in the hands of children. And it's I have personal friends who, you know, they got in a car wreck and they were given Oxycontin. And then it was 5 years later and they should be over their pain per their doctor. So they're scrounging for anything. You know, I've seen it all, and we've seen it all as a state. So I think, you know, are we a conservative state? Typically, yes. But I think we're all over it. We're over the crisis, especially the addiction crisis. We're definitely over, you know, not having veterans, and we love our veterans and our first responders. So I know as a state, we want to see those people get help. We love them, and we don't live to 60 anymore, right? Outside of the suicidal, you know, ideations, all those things y'all speak about. Outside of that, I have many friends who are police officers who retire at 50, and they still have 40 more years to live a life.
You know, the unique thing about Ibogaine and the Ibogaine Initiative is that this is, and by virtue of the vote alone, a non-partisan issue.
It should be. It should be a human issue. It should be,
It is.
do you
Amen.
love the people who have taken care of you for your whole entire life? Then let's do what's right by them and take care of them. Whether you know them personally or not. You know, the first thing you do when you see your kitchen on fire is dial 911 and hope someone's going to come help you. Or when your kid has a seizure, or when you get an offender bender, right? I mean, they are the first people we are reaching out to for help. So why wouldn't we want to give them as much help as we can? Mm-hmm. And that's a human problem. And if you're one of the two people that says, no, I'm not into that, well, then you're not in the right office, and we should take care of that. So hopefully, hopefully James will find out their names. We can put them out there.
Working on it.
You know, it's interesting to speak about what can we do. It oftentimes does feel so small. It feels like we have these elected officials and that's it. But we have to understand, especially with the Ibogaine Initiative right now, this is new.
Right.
This is, and a lot of elected officials don't have the education on this to have an opinion. So if you want to make a difference in your community,
share
pick up
this
your phone
episode too.
and call your elected official and let them know that you want them to vote for anything that comes up on the agenda regarding Ibogaine.
Right.
Just let them know that you want this compound to be widely available to the American people. And that's how you can start to make a difference, is with your voice, as Bryan said.
And to your point, share this, share the Joe Rogan episode, share the episodes you've been on, share it, because
it only takes 10% of a population to make a shift, and that's not a lot of people.
no, it's not. And you know, everyone's sitting on their phones anyway, getting God knows what information. So why not share something worthwhile?
Yeah, who doesn't want to work on their brain health?
Right.
I mean, come on.
I mean,
my hopes are that
I mean, the idea of being paralyzed for 12 hours sounds a little terrifying, but
Bryan was being dramatic.
but if you come out, but the way,
6 hours.
and my, you know, knock on wood, my people live, my grandmother's 92 years old, and every year she tells me it's her last Christmas. I'm like, Nana, God is not ready for you. You will be here a while longer. And, you know, so the way I haven't even lived half my life. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't I want my brain to be as healthy as possible for the next half of my life, and anyone in that for that matter, live that way. So beyond sharing the information like you spoke about, and then obviously calling your representatives, what can we also do to help?
Well, I got to throw this in here. If you want to help a first responder
343 Fund, yes.
You can go to the 343fund.org. We have a beautiful fundraiser going on that for $3.43 a week, basically the price of a cup of coffee, you can help.
It's less,
change.
Actually, much less.
It depends on where you go.
True.
And what kind of coffee you drink.
Yeah.
But for
definitely less than Starbucks.
Less than a cup of coffee, you can change a first responder's life. It takes about $10,000 per person to go soup to nuts through the program, including pre and post journey integration and their actual journey. And you cannot go to a hospital and save a life for that kind of money.
No.
This is a deal, and people need to start thinking about it that way so that everybody in the world can have access to this medication one day, because every human deserves this. Every human deserves to know God, and every human deserves to have access to his medicine.
That's great. And so they go to the website, they hit donate now. Can we set up where it actually does a weekly payment?
Every week.
Great.
Every week I get a text that says, thank you for
your 343
donation
okay.
to Casey Skudin.
I'm doing that when we get off of here.
We lost 343 first responders at 9/11.
Yeah,
but
one of my good friends' father.
We lost, if you look up, we lost so many more than that.
So many more.
And today I have the honor of treating first responders that not only were present at 9/11, but their children that lost their parents at 9/11 that are now first responders.
So one of my very best friends, college roommate, her uncle was a firefighter in 9/11, and he had two boys. One of them who's a year older than us, one who's a year younger. The one who's a year older ended up dropping out of his freshman year of college because I was to help in the rubble and look for his dad, basically. And so he did that for the year, and then he ended up being obviously got signed off everything he needed. He ended up our freshman year of college. He went to Army, wound up, going and being in the military. He actually came and was in Killeen here in Texas, so we got to be with him quite a bit while he was here. Went on to Colorado, went on 2 different tours, Iraq and Afghanistan. The younger brother decided he wanted to be like dad. He's now in FDNY. The mom does tours for the FDNY museum all the time. And it's, talk about you could take a tragedy and let it completely tear your family apart. Or you can take a tragedy and spread awareness and create a family from it. And that's really kind of their entire family storyline, is out of the ashes is who they've become. And
there
and
is
it's so
nothing
great.
more beautiful on this earth than watching someone's transmutation of pain into some beautiful healing. And I love to hear that 9/11 has also made generations of firefighters to come just from that honor. So may the healing for all continue always. And thank you so much, Bryan.
Yes, Bryan,
for being here with us.
Sure.
And
all you're doing, honestly,
for this initiative.
And I'm proud to be a Texan, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing here.
It is an immense privilege and joy to have the opportunity to serve this cause. And when I look back at those early memories in life and some of the difficulties that came with having parents who were at enmity with each other, I recognize, thanks to the perspective Ibogaine brings, that there is a divine plan for every human being, where even the deepest hardships lead to some of the greatest beauty that can be produced on this side of eternity. And I thank God for everything that I have experienced that has hopefully prepared me to be a good and faithful servant, along with folks like Angela, to hasten the day that we can bring good tidings unto the meek, bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound.
Well, thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Yes, sir. I think we got to end on that one. That was good. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. It was
Thanks so much.
fun.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.